Quarkus Insights, episode number 15, Kubernetes and OpenShift with Quarkus, with special guest Georgios Andrianakis. Hey everybody, this is Jason Green here for your episode number 15 of Quarkus Insights. I'm Quarkus co-host, co-lead, and your host for today. But it's not just one host. We also have the creator of Quarkus Insights, the incredible Max Anderson, and our very special guest, Georgios here, who's Quarkus core developer, leads the Quarkus Spring integration area, does everything cloud, you name it. And so, Georgios, you want to sort of introduce you? And I know you're a show regular, but do you want to go ahead and tell everybody a bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks a lot for the kind words, Jason. So basically, I started contributing to Quarkus when it was released internally here at Red Hat. I was like super enthused by it once I saw it. I mean, I had an intuition that this is going to be great, this is going to be massive. So I really wanted to jump on board as much as I could. I started with like Jason said, I started with the Spring stuff and then branched out to the cloud stuff and basically various things nowadays. And it's been a huge pleasure to work with so many talented folks and this awesome community we have here. It's been an amazing experience. Before that, like on my previous jobs, I basically did Spring, so I had like very little Java EE experience. I was like almost exclusively working with Spring technologies, and for example, I started using Spring Boot in like version like 0.5 milestone 6. So that's just to give you an overview of like how diversified the Quarkus team really is.
That's awesome. And what was the first open source project that you sent a PR to or sent a patch in?
That's a good question. There's probably some doc to, no, that's a good question. There's probably some doc to Spring. That was the first serious thing I ever did, like that actually kept me up at night doing work, was moving Jackson's Afterburner from ASM to ByteBuddy. That was like the first thing that took me like more than a few days of actual work to get done. Now that was really interesting.
I think that's like also. I was thinking back. I think mine was like contributing the Emacs Java integration (JDE) like ages ago in Lisp. I think that was the first open source project.
Really? That's cool. I did not know that.
That's a long time.
Yeah,
I think I contributed to every idea in the planet.
So you were into tooling from the early days, right?
Oh yeah, my first real work was ended up being maintaining a Python stack to do like dependency resolution before those stuff like Maven and Ant. So that was good times. I had that to work in Emacs.
That's awesome.
How about Jason?
So if we did the so for me, my first. I think it was a Apache HTTP server. I have to think back. The one I would say I was like a more like significant contributor to is the programming language you may have heard called PHP. A long distant time ago. But yeah, I had to think really hard on that one. It was during before the .com burst and all that craziness that happened. But I was going to say, Matt, so if I was to do the whole like controversial developer question of VI versus Emacs, then you would come down on the Emacs side, I take it?
Probably. Depend on what day of the week it is.
Oh, okay. So you use them all. Yeah. Because I don't know if you guys know this about Max. So Max used to lead a very small project called the JMOS Developer Studio. Yeah, no, I'm joking. Of course, it was a huge IDE set of tools that did everything from like live HTML editing and extensions for. I think it was the first Hibernate. Was it the first Hibernate IDE?
No, that was the way. Yeah, the first thing I got to the one thing I got my hired was did the Hibernate tools stuff for a Swing app that turned to an Eclipse app. So yeah.
That's awesome stuff. Okay, so and then Georgios, where are you on the Vi versus Emacs, or is it like who uses either of these things?
No, I use the VI when I needed any command line thing. I use VI. I don't think I've ever opened Emacs.
Yeah. So maybe everybody who's in the audience wants to weigh in. Feel free to comment on your VI versus Emacs. For me, I'm a hardcore on the VI camp. So
Okay.
I still use VI. I have to like switch all the time back to. But of course, for editing Java, you have to use an IDE, of course. So everybody knows who's maybe somebody's new to the show, the way this works is that the show is only as interesting as, well, we try to make it as interesting as possible, but it's more interesting when you comment, when you add your thoughts or questions, and we react live. So I will gladly disrupt Georgios in the middle of his presentation to answer a question. But Georgios is going to be doing a demo for us today to understand how you can deploy Quarkus applications to Kubernetes. And we have an Emacs vote. I'll have to add this to the broadcaster. So Tokyo, question for you I would have is, did you use the Towers of Hanoi plugin in Emacs? Because I think that's the only thing I ever did in Emacs was that. Okay, so I'm kind of going off topic here. Let's switch to Georgios. Georgios, you want to go ahead and?
Yeah, I'll share my screen. Hopefully y'all can see my screen now, right? Should be an IDE here.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Basically, this is a topic that we really wanted to get out there with conferences and stuff, but with all the pandemic situation around the world, this has been obviously not an option. So a lot of people are super interested in this. We've had a lot of questions on regular, our channels, Zulip chat and emails and everything. And it's also because the way our documentation is structured, there's a lot of small guys. It's been kind of hard for people to find the big picture, how all these pieces fit together and what you can do. So basically, that's what I'm going to try to do here today. I'm going to try to show you what the big picture is, and also what each individual component does, and how you can configure things differently when you're deploying to OpenShift or Kubernetes. So basically, what I have here is just a regular Quarkus application that I created from our tooling. Let's disable the extensions for now. So this is just a Quarkus application. Obviously, Quarkus dev will work. Problem. Okay, so hopefully 8080 and greeting will just work. So it does. Excellent. So that's it, right? Let's say you've already written all your code. My code is nothing for the moment. It's just this greeting endpoint. So let's say you've written all your code, and now you're at the stage where you really want to deploy something to Kubernetes or something like that, right? So the first step, obviously, when we're talking about Kubernetes, we have to talk about building a container image. A container image is what you would run with what you would build with, let's say, a Docker build or a Podman build, and then you would run with Docker run. So for those who are not super familiar with what Kubernetes does behind the scenes, it relies on the existence of a Docker image that you actually configure Kubernetes and you tell it to run a specific Docker image. So there's obviously a ton of details in between, but the starting point is that you need to create a Docker image from your application. And when we're talking about vanilla Kubernetes, not OpenShift, which I'll touch on later, the way we expect that first of all, we'll be able to deploy our application is first we need to create an image and push it to a registry, right? A registry being like Docker IO or Quay IO. So the first step I'm going to take here is to make my application, my Quarkus application, create a container image for me, right? And I'm going to do that by adding this extension, the container image gib extension, or I could have alternatively used the container image Docker. What's gib? Gib you probably heard of, for those who have played around with this space in the Java world. Gib is basically a library that allows you to create container images without having to rely on Docker tooling or any other tooling for that matter. And it also comes with plugins, Maven and Gradle plugins, but in Quarkus we don't use that. What we do in Quarkus is we use the actual Gib library, and we control its lifecycle and integrate its lifecycle into Quarkus in a way that when you build your Quarkus jar application or the native application, if you enable Gib, then you can get a Docker image as well. So let's see how you do that. So I added a container image Gib extension. By default, if I just do clean package, it's not going to, Gib isn't going to come into play in any way, right? Because we don't always want to create a Docker image. But if I do Quarkus container image build, set that to true, then what it's going to do is that after the jar gets created as part of the Maven build, right? So I just did clean package and added a configuration flag. So what it does is that after it creates the jar, we launch Gib in such a way that it creates a Docker container, Docker image, based on the jar that was created. So the jar here is the Quarkus Kubernetes demo runner, and the Docker image we'll see is Docker images. If I do Docker images, I see that it created here at the top. It just created a container image for me. And because I configured it to use Quay as a registry, and I said GeoAnd as the group, I could have, if I left this out, it would have used the username of my host of my machine. So this is going to be useful later when we actually want to deploy this. Oh, and it's called Kubernetes Demo Native, which is incorrect. I was going to use the native for later. So let's build that again. And feel free to ask me anything here, because this might go kind of fast, depending on what people's expectations are. So let's do Docker images again. And now I should see that there is the Kubernetes demo tag that was created just now. So if I take this and run it, Docker run 1.0, and by the way, 1.0 was the tag that was used because that's the version I'm using in Maven. It's also configurable, of course. If I do Docker run and set the port that I want to export 8080, then I obviously get a running container. So with one command, with one extension, Kubernetes container image Gib and this flag here, Kubernetes container image build, I was able to add an additional step to the build, which was to create a Docker image locally, right? So I haven't pushed anything to any registry yet. It's just local. I think we have a question.
Yes, yeah. Quick question is, so when you're using a Gib extension, will that also add your container image to your local Docker registry? And I assume in addition to Quay, and then what if you don't currently have a local Docker?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. That's a source of confusion that comes up every now and then. So what I did now was I just built it locally, which did mean that I only built it into my Docker daemon, right? So in this case, what Gib did is it communicated with the Docker host and built the container into the Docker daemon. What I'm going to do next, which is I'm going to push it to a registry. And when I push it to the registry, then it does not do anything with a local Docker host. So if I were just to push an image and not build it, so if I were to do this instead of build, like push instead of build, then I wouldn't even need Docker locally. I could just push this to the registry, which I'll do right now, right? So it will push to Quay, GeoAnd, and it will use the name of the application, which is Quarkus Demo. So let's do that right now. So what it's doing now, okay, we'll go through the process again. It builds the jar, right? And now it's building the image, but it's going to push it to Quay. And once this is done, it should only take like a few seconds. Once this is done, we'll log on to Quay and see that it was actually built. So it tells us here in the logs it pushed container image, blah, blah. So if I refresh here, I see that the tag was pushed, updated, created a few seconds ago, which means that I am actually using this, right? So if I were now to go to and say Docker RMI, if I need to remove that, I need to force remove that. So if I remove the container image locally and I run it now, it will work because I've already deployed this to Quad. This would take a while probably because it needs to pull layers. So I'll get moving on. Oh, actually, it did that real quick. So that was it, right? You saw that it pushed the image to the registry. I was able to pull it, and everything just worked just fine. So that's like the first part, right? And like I said, I could have used the Docker extension instead of the Jib extension. And with the Docker extension, it does use a local Docker CLI, and it relies on these files here, the Docker file, JVM, Docker file, native, depending on what you're using. So that's the first step, right? But that's cool if Kubernetes is not, and that's enough actually. If Kubernetes has not yet come into play, when Kubernetes does come into play, you need to use the Kubernetes extension, for example, which I'll show. And when I just use the Kubernetes extension, like I do clean package, this, like I said before, the mere existence of Jib doesn't make it create the container image, so no container image was created. And in the same way, just having the extension doesn't mean that it will push, it will deploy onto Kubernetes, so it doesn't deploy yet. What it does, though, is create, on the file system, it creates the Kubernetes manifests that correspond to the application, right? So without doing anything on your part, just adding Quarkus Kubernetes extension, you get the YAML and JSON files that you could use to deploy this manually, right? So we've had this part, this specific part, we've had this for a fairly long time, probably even before, maybe around 1.0 or 1.1, I'm not sure. We've had this for a very long time. But up until now, up until like, I don't know, 1.3 maybe, not sure, people had to use this file and deploy to Kubernetes or OpenShift or MiniCube or whatever. They had to deploy manually, right? That was a good first step, but there was a lot to do. And we really wanted to make the experience, it's like almost zero configuration, like almost effortless for people to do. So if there aren't any more questions, then I can move on to showing how to deploy to MiniCube.
Yeah, real quick. I was going to just ask. I noticed for demo purposes you're uncommenting out POM sections, but how would a someone who's using Quarkus, how would they go about getting these extensions that you're using?
Great question. Okay, so if I were to use our command line tooling, I could go nvn Quarkus add extension, and it would I have to add the extensions, right? I think this. I almost never do this. But,
yeah, you could do list extensions too if you just want to see.
Oh, right. Right. So yeah, we have command line tooling that allows you to do this, and it list extensions, or I could from code.quarkus.io. Obviously, I could when I created the application, I could have selected the Kubernetes thing extensions here. Kubernetes. So you have Kubernetes, you have OpenShift, MiniCube, things like that. Now. Slightly related to your question, because I've been commenting and uncommenting, if I wanted to do multiple things, like have multiple configurations enabled or present at the same time, I would probably use like a Maven profile. And like if I was doing local deployment to MiniCube, I would have like a MiniCube profile. If I was deploying to regular Kubernetes, I'd have like a Kubernetes profile or something like that, and I would switch between that when I was building. But here, just to like make it real simple, I'm just commenting and stuff like that. Yeah.
Let's do a quick spoiler. I just reviewed this morning the PR for Quarkus CLI, so you don't have to remember all these commands. So it's just Quarkus deploy, Quarkus list. So that should come, if not in 1.8, then in 1.9. But we'll see.
And that's the great thing with Quarkus, because like most of us like know almost everything, but like it moves so fast that there's always this new stuff coming and making your life easier. So like what Max said is something that like happens fairly often. Like we do something, then something better comes along, and there's an easier way to do it. So yeah, that would be good for me, because I never remember this add extension or remove extension thing. All right, so let's say I wanted, the first step for me, like as a developer, probably would be to deploy to MiniCube, right? I have MiniCube running, so that's what a lot of developers are comfortable with, MiniCube, because they can run it locally, they can install anything they want on MiniCube, and so on and so forth. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you the easiest way to deploy onto MiniCube. So I'm going to add the MiniCube extension, which is basically, it's exactly the same as the Kubernetes extension, except that it adds a few configuration flags. It enables a few configuration flags to make it like zero configuration deployment to MiniCube, because MiniCube has like a few differences. So basically, most people, when they deploy to MiniCube, they don't use a registry. So what the idea when you're deploying to MiniCube is that you use MiniCube's Docker daemon as the actual Docker daemon you build a container image into, instead of pushing it to a registry. And so that's in this terminal. I have MiniCube running. I've already done, let me see what it's called.
Yeah, just so everybody knows who may not be familiar with MiniCube, MiniCube is a Kubernetes instance that runs locally on your system as opposed to remotely. So what Georgios is showing here, he's actually doing this all locally on his system, so you can do like a full cloud test environment.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I think there's, yeah, normally I would do like a MiniCube start, but I've already done that because I don't want to wait around for it to start. It takes like a couple minutes to start up. So I've already started it. I haven't changed any configuration on MiniCube, just left it as it is. The one thing I do need to make this work is that we need to tell our shell instance here to use the Docker daemon of MiniCube. And that will allow us to actually build the container image into MiniCube. So that's what this eval command does. You can find this anywhere on MiniCube's documentation. So basically now, whatever when I do like Docker PS here, it uses it looks up the running containers inside the MiniCube VM. So Docker images will also show the images on that VM, right? So it's not my local one, it's the Docker host inside the MiniCube VM. And now, this is how easy it is to deploy into MiniCube, right? So just by adding MiniCube extension and adding this one property, Kubernetes deploy true. Let's make a code change real quick, and just to show you that.
And I want to just be clear. If you could also just use normal Kubernetes on MiniCube, right? It's just that the developer experience won't be as nice, right?
Yes, exactly. So that's exactly right. That's a good point. I could use the exact same extension, like the Kubernetes extension, and configure a few flags in order to deploy onto MiniCube, but I haven't done that. We've decided collectively that the MiniCube route is better because it provides like zero configuration for the deployment. And the most important part is that with MiniCube, you don't have a registry, so you want to build straight into the Docker daemon, but there are a couple other details as well. So when I do that and I add Quarkus Kubernetes deploy true and I run it, I should see in a couple seconds. Oops. Yes. Oh, great. Right. This is this. I wanted to show this, so this is good that this came up. What happened here basically is that when we're trying to deploy onto Kubernetes, we need to contact the API server, right? And because my MiniCube API server isn't running behind, isn't using a valid HTTPS certificate, TLS certificate, we need to explicitly tell the Kubernetes client that, yeah, go ahead and trust it. So that's why the output here actually tells you that the output that we provide with Quarkus actually tells you what the proper path is, that you have to add the certificate to the Kubernetes client, or it tells you that, yeah, go ahead and trust the certificates, but it's not really recommended. But just so we don't waste time, I'm going to trust the certificates here.
So
add this property.
George, sorry to interrupt real quick. We have a couple of questions here I just want to ask. So one question is there an extension for remote debug on MiniCube that's on the roadmap for?
That's a good question. So we currently have a gap, right? And Max knows this really well. We have a gap between bridging the Kubernetes extensions and like the remote dev experience. We don't have that yet, but I anticipate that we'll soon be figuring that out and figuring what the proper way to do this. Because like you showed in the previous session with Stuart, Stuart has done a ton of work on the remote dev stuff, made it super easy to work with. This session will hopefully show how the Kubernetes stuff is super easy to work with. So we want to find the proper path to combine those two.
So just to add to that, so the remote dev should work today. I haven't tried MiniCube, but it should work today, as Stuart showed last week. It's literally you set an option and enable it, and then it should work whether it's Kubernetes, OpenShift, or MiniCube.
Sure, yeah. But I'm talking about like a zero configuration experience type of thing.
Sure, but the thing is, as soon as you do remote, the one thing you have to put in is the password. Like you have to put in like some kind of unique sequence. But the thing, if he's talking about debugging, which requires like open a port, that kind of thing, it's not on the roadmap, but it could be interesting. So Tokyo, if you want to, like open an issue and what it is you want to do, and then let's talk about it. I could see us do some of this.
Oh, so we're talking about Java debugging, right? Oh, okay, yeah. That can be done, but yeah, it's probably a little tricky to see what the proper experience will be.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I could see how it could be interesting to do like a remote dev mode somehow integrated with at least with the standalone Kubernetes extension, perhaps. MiniCube.
Yeah.
Not as sure, but maybe it makes sense. And we have another question from Antonio, which is about what the MiniCube extension does differently as far as does it change the content of Kubernetes.yaml?
Oh, great idea. Great. Yeah, let's see that in action. So this is what it does, right? Okay, so when I did MiniCube, it also, besides the standard Kubernetes YAML, it also creates a MiniCube YAML, right? So if I compare these two, let's see what the difference is. So the first and most important difference, like I mentioned earlier, is the use of node port. Node port means that we'll actually be using a system port to access the service instead of using like regular Kubernetes networking. So this is like a shortcut that's available in regular Kubernetes as well, but you shouldn't use it in production. But by far, when you use MiniCube, it's the easiest solution to actually access your application. Then it adds a specific node port. This is to make it make the deployment not change, the port not change over time. Now it also changes the SIMage pull policy because if you have always, even if in MiniCube, if the VM, the Docker host of the VM does have, even if it does have the image, if you use always, it'll try to pull it from your registry like Docker, and it won't find it, and things will just fall down. So those are the basic differences, right? So that was a good question. It gave us a chance to see this live. Now, do we have any more questions?
No, that's it. We just have a quick comment from Minus here that MiniCube stuff is also added to minicube.yaml. So
yeah, that's exactly
we should bring him into the channel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ioannis was he did a ton of work on this, so yeah, this is his baby as well. So yeah, we actually wanted to have him, but he got a new laptop that I guess had some kind of issues connecting. Oh, well, he wasn't absolutely sure that it would work. It wasn't battle tested on this kind of live situation. But yeah, it's I just want to say, yeah, this is a lot of Ioannis' work as well. So definitely a shout out to him. Okay, so actually I ran the command, I deployed it into MiniCube, and now I just need to find out the what's called the URL to access this. So
we don't print that yet.
Yeah, we haven't. Yeah, we have to print that. That's true. But I think there's something wrong here because it didn't actually deploy. Maybe.
Oh, it's been a while since we haven't failed.
No, actually, I know what happened. I know what happened. Basically, yeah, I'm using 2 different Kubernetes clusters, and I haven't used the proper context.
So if you guys had any question as to whether or not we pre-record these demos, your question has now been answered.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, let me go ahead and delete because this deployed to my proper Kubernetes cluster, which it shouldn't have done. Kubernetes MiniCube. So yeah, I'm going to delete that.
You destroy production. That's what you're saying.
Excuse me.
You deploy it to your production server. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's not exactly production, but it's a cluster that we use for tests. But yeah, I didn't deploy the proper one. So basically, yeah, I hadn't set the proper context. Now I have. So if I go kubectl get pods, I'm in the default namespace. I should have checked that before I deploy. So yeah, this is like Max said, you should always be very careful where you're deploying to. Everybody's heard horror stories like deleting the wrong database or something like that. That could easily happen with Kubernetes tools as well. So good thing I wasn't using a real cluster for this.
So I have a great old school JBoss story here.
Let's hear it.
So we used to have, for our developer usage for JBoss, if you would use it in JBoss Developer Studio, so you get your IDE, you get your JBoss instance, you run it locally. What would happen is we had the same, because it was the same configuration whether you're in production or development, what would happen is it was the same multicast port. So if you were using clustering, we actually had cases where users were, because they were on the same network, they're actually joining, their IDEs were joining the production cluster and handling load. So then we quickly changed the port just so that people wouldn't run into that. So yeah, it's amazing like how many safeguards you really need to keep the, from doing that kind of stuff.
So yeah, I can imagine like a developer sitting there getting real traffic and then start panicking and like going crazy. Wow. Okay, so I was actually able to deploy it this time. Like Max said, we need to hit this MiniCube service list that will give me the port, that will give me the URL. We need to add this to the output here. It's just like a matter of that there's so much stuff to do that we haven't gotten to it. But anyway, but we get this, and if I hit the, oops. So here's my application, and I go greeting, and it's the same thing that I deployed. So you saw how easy that was, right? It was I just used the MiniCube extension, and that's it. I just deployed with this one command, and it worked. So let me try to change something real quick. And this is where I really want us to like have the remote dev experience, right? Because now I need to do the same packaging again in order to deploy the application a second time. Let's see what happened here. In namespace default, right. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure what I did right, what I did wrong here. But anyway, it should be able to properly redeploy the application. Probably missed something here, but anyway, it's not super important. I see we have a question, right?
Yeah, so the question is how do you handle rolling updates with Kubernetes deploy?
So that's a good question. Basically, we don't handle them explicitly. What we do is we change the Kubernetes deployment changes a little bit. So you have a new Kubernetes deployment because it has this timestamp here. It's a new deployment. So you buy it on its own. The deployment changes. So therefore, a new replica set is created, and therefore the old pods are taken down and new pods are brought up. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a policy of your own based on like what your organization's the instructions in your organization are, because this part, the Kubernetes deployment, almost everything in the YAML is configurable, right? So the labels you use, the selectors you use, anything like that is configurable. And in this case, I didn't change the version as well. You could have changed the version, like with every update. You could use like a Maven SHA version or something like that to enforce a different policy. We don't enforce a policy, but by default. But you definitely could, because like I said, the whole Kubernetes YAML thing is configurable.
It might be here interesting to also tell people like that not only can you configure the parts what we generate, but the whole idea is also that if you don't find that this stuff we're doing is proper for your setup, or it's done later in the chain of your CI or whatever, you can just pass the Kubernetes YAML on to the whatever other tool you're using, whether that's Argo CD or plain kubectl or whatever. So yeah, you can basically. The idea is that we have a good, let's say, developer experience and a fairly basic deploy. But if you want to do more advanced and complicated stuff, go ahead and customize it as you want. We'll just give you here's a decent YAML to start with.
Yes, exactly. And it's a good thing you brought up that you mentioned this, how configurable YAML is. We also wanted to have this YAML react, let's say, be reactive, let's say, in a sense, to how you've actually configured your application, right? So when, for example, this added health checks and liveness checks because I have the health extension. If I take out the health extension, for example, and I just build and do nothing else, then we'll see in the YAML there will be no health checks or health liveness probes and readiness probes. I took a while to restart. So if you see here, all the health and the readiness went away because we configured the application differently. So the idea is that you just configure your Quarkus application like you regularly do, right? Like with extensions, with properties. Let's say like I change the port of the application. Instead of 8080, I want it to always be at 8081. If I build again, then we'll see that YAML gets updated. It should be at 8081. So this is really important, right? When you're using pure, to loop back to what Max said, when you were handcrafting this type of YAML, or you were using some other tool that had like no Quarkus, no insights into Quarkus, this YAML couldn't react. It couldn't be like updated with the domain, the Quarkus specific domain knowledge that you have. So that's a really important part as well. Now I think we showed enough MiniCubes. I think I should move on to the actual Kubernetes cluster that I'm using. It's okay. So not here. Let's go here. OC project. OC project. I'll switch to my. So this is a Kubernetes. This is an OpenShift cluster that I'll be using here, right? So OpenShift is Red Hat's distribution of Kubernetes. It adds a ton of enterprise and super useful stuff onto vanilla Kubernetes. Like one of the things you'll see here is this amazing UI, right? So this is what I deployed earlier by accident. So I'll delete that. And it also had a service somewhere, and no, it didn't. So I must have deleted it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use this OpenShift cluster as a vanilla Kubernetes cluster, because OpenShift is, besides all the extra stuff it adds, it has all the regular vanilla Kubernetes stuff. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to deploy this application, not onto MiniCube, but onto Kubernetes. Which means that I'll be pushing to the registry, and the YAML will reference the image. And the whole idea is that I build the jar. I build the jar with Quarkus, then I build the container image with Quarkus and push it into the registry. And then the Quarkus Kubernetes extension takes over and actually generates the Kubernetes manifests and pushes them into the Kubernetes cluster. So as you see here, kubectl get pods. Oops, that was wrong. So I don't have any pods running here. This cluster, I have no idea like where it is, so it might not even be in Europe. So it takes a while to respond sometimes, but I have like no pods in this cluster. So what we want to do now is take this application, actually deploy it, let's say to a production-like environment. So again, all I have to do is I need to I need to use this flag, which is the important one. Quarkus Kubernetes deploy true, and it's the same flag to trust the certificates again. And of course, I'm not using MiniCube anymore. I'm using regular Kubernetes. So while that deploys, we'll look at the Kubernetes YAML again. Okay, so now Jib is building and pushing the image to Quay. We should see that here in a couple seconds, and then we'll. Yeah.
So while that's going, I know some of you that are listening in may be new to Kubernetes, and you're seeing all these command lines go across, and you're like, "Oh my God, this sounds really complicated." So the thing to mention is that if you just to emphasize that there's this flag with the deployment process where it's Kubernetes deploy. That is mostly all you need to know. All the stuff about the generation of the YAML and everything, that's all automated for you. So if you're just trying this out for the first time, you can follow our guide, and it's just set up a local instance of MiniCube and then run this deploy command, and then you get a running instance. And then as you start to build your knowledge up, there's a lot of great reference guides on how you use OpenShift, how you use Kubernetes straight on. Then you're really just building off that existing implementation that you created initially. So try not to get too overwhelmed with with all of this different stuff. Of course, those of you that are already familiar with Kubernetes, this should start to make a lot more sense on how you sort of tie these Quarkus concepts. Depending on where you are, feel free to, of course, to jump in at any time and ask any questions, and we can do our best to answer them.
Yeah, absolutely, because we know that people are on different they have like one journey to deploy to Kubernetes, to get to Kubernetes, but there's so much stuff that we don't really know, like how many people are still at the beginning, how many people are like super advanced users. What I'm trying to do here is like show you the big picture, but also show you the details. I'm obviously probably not getting everything right, or maybe not even most of the things right. So yeah, the more questions you have here, the better, because I'm probably assuming a lot of stuff here. But
no, I think it's great. I just want to comment just in case. Now, one thing that's interesting is Sebastian just pointed out that there's a common mistake. I think it's a good tip, is that when you deploy to Quay for the first time, your repo's private, which then means it can't be seen. When you're trying to actually deploy that image into Kubernetes.
That is an excellent tip, and I'll show that right here. I made it public before. But that's exactly, if I had a new one, there was some setting somewhere here in the middle that would have said that it's private and you can't use it. And there would have been a little lock here on the demo. But yeah, that's very, very common to see. And when you deploy to Docker IO, it's public automatically, but when you deploy to Quay IO, it's private by default. Okay, so now let's make sure that what we actually deployed made it to Quay. Let's see. Tag was created 3 minutes ago. Excellent. And we have our deployment, right? And we should also have our pods running. So if I go into this pod and see the logs, it is the application that I ran. It's 8081 because, I had configured the port. And now, right? The other thing that is so much better in OpenShift than vanilla Kubernetes is this concept of a route, right? Oh, sorry, routes here. Basically, in OpenShift, you have a super easy way to make your application accessible from the outside world. Where in Kubernetes you have ingress, but it's not that great. So I'm just going to show you how in OpenShift you would expose this, because because we're using the Kubernetes extension instead of the OpenShift extension at this point of the demo. It doesn't generate any OpenShift specific manifests. It only generates like the deployment, the service account, the service. So I haven't I haven't exposed it. But when I want to expose it, I'll go to Quarkus Kubernetes demo, and I'll tell it the service, and I'll expose port 8081. And now I should be able to access my application. Yes, and it worked. Great. So that was, like Jason said, the big picture was I only added one extension, Kubernetes. I only basically had to configure the registry and the group to be able to push the registry. And I used this one flag, like Quarkus Kubernetes deploy, and that's it, right? Then Quarkus just did all the rest of the work for me, and that's how I got a Quarkus application from my machine to a production-like Kubernetes cluster. And if I wanted to go, if let's say I have OpenShift in my organization, which I would definitely go for if I had the chance, instead of vanilla Kubernetes, then let me delete the, kubectl delete -f target Kubernetes and Kubernetes YAML. Oops, yeah, this is a bug that we've already fixed in master, yeah, we've already fixed it, but it's not part of a release yet. We'll have it obviously in 1.8, and if we do one more 1.7s, we'll have that fixed as well. But let's say I wanted to deploy to OpenShift. What does that mean? That means that I don't want to use the regular Kubernetes like deployment. I want to use the deployment config. And with OpenShift, I don't have to use a registry. I don't have to configure a registry because OpenShift has its own registry, and it can create a container image from inside the cluster. What is that? So what does that actually look like? I have the OpenShift extension. I'll disable gib because I don't need it to build the container image. So at first, what that means is that let's just look at the output. The output that's generated is the OpenShift YAML, and the OpenShift YAML contains a deployment config instead of the deployment, and it has this build config, which configures OpenShift to actually build the application from the input we give it, which in this case will be jar. And again, you don't have to know much of anything about OpenShift to make this work, right? Quarkus does this, will deploy this application automatically for you with all the defaults. Like Jason said, if you want to make it more, you want to configure it, then you learn by our guides what you actually want to configure. So let's deploy that again, and this time. Let's delete the route because the route should be created for me because I'm going to deploy an OpenShift, and I have a deployment here. No, sorry, I deleted it. So let's go ahead and build it. So now what this does is, for those that are familiar with OpenShift, it uses OpenShift's S2I, which means source to image. So basically, it takes your input, which in this case is the jar, and it'll create an image. There's a lot of ways that OpenShift allows you to do this. For the time being, we're using what OpenShift calls the binary build, but we're looking into more options. Max knows that Max and the audience know that we've been talking about this a lot and trying to enable different options. So basically, what this does is that we're uploading a jar. And then OpenShift will take that jar and create an image, container image for us, which means that I'm not using any external registry, right? I could if I wanted to, but here I'm leveraging the platform capabilities of OpenShift. This take a minute or so. Do we have any questions that we want to answer before, instead of just looking at the?
Sure. Well, let me just ask you, because I know you've been demoing Java mode. If you were to do this all in native, what would the workflow look like differently?
That's going to be the last part of what I have to.
Oh, you do have it in your demo. Okay, awesome.
Yeah. Basically, I was going to show Knative, so serverless with a native image, right? That's the thing I'm going to show right after this. So basically, yeah, it's almost no change. You'll see that it's almost no change. So now, same process. We uploaded the jar, and then we applied, let's say, this OpenShift YAML to the Kubernetes API server, and we're not going to see deployment. What we're going to see is the deployment config, which is OpenShift specific. And we're going to also see a route that will enable us to, no, we're not going to see a route because I didn't expose it. Right. If I do Quarkus OpenShift expose equals true, then that's when so we don't expose the application by default, but you can if you want to. So if I do a clean package just to show you what it will contain, what the additional part that it will contain, it would also contain the YAML for the route. But we don't do that automatically because not every service that you want to deploy should be automatically exposed. A lot of stuff is internal. So it should be right here, route, right? So if I apply this, then we would see pretty much the same result as we did earlier. Do we have any questions before I move on to like the Knative thing?
I think you should go. You have 8 minutes left, so go.
Okay. Okay, basically. Okay, so to do Knative, right? I'll just revert. So sorry, this OpenShift application extension is the same as the Kubernetes extension, but it just configures things a little different. So it's the same idea as the MiniCube. It can't do anything extra than the Kubernetes can. It just configures things to make it easier to have a better experience on OpenShift specifically. So now I'm going to revert back to Kubernetes because now we're going to use Knative. So what is that going to do? And I'm going to actually build the native image as well, right? So like Jason said, when we're building a regular Quarkus native image, what we do is we package and we do the native, which enables a Maven profile, right? That's what I would do regularly. But this time, since I also want to deploy to Kubernetes, I'm going to change the name to Quarkus Kubernetes Demo Native. So now the image name is going to be demo with a native instead of just demo. I want to take this out. We don't need this either. And that's about it. So all I need now is the Quarkus Kubernetes. No, sorry, I need the Quarkus Kubernetes deploy true. Okay, deploy equals true. But I also need to tell it that now I want Knative, right? And how do I do that? We have this concept of the deployment target. So the deployment target is basically set automatically for you, depending on the extension you have active. But in this case, I want to change the default. So I want to deploy to Knative. I want to actually generate Knative manifests and deploy those manifests onto Kubernetes, but I want the Knative stuff instead of the plain Kubernetes stuff. Actually, this will fail because I haven't added this. Trust certificates. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm going to build a native image, but that's what the clean package dnative does. I'm telling it to deploy, and I'm telling it to use Knative. That's all I'm doing, right? So that's all the configuration you need. You needed to tell it that build a native image like you would with regular Quarkus. Go build the native image locally. Then deploy with the same command, the same flag we used earlier, Quarkus Kubernetes dot deploy equals true. And we add an extra step, which is to tell it what type of manifest to use. Not Kubernetes, we wanted Knative in this instance. And I'm going to do Knative because this OpenShift cluster I have has Knative active, right? So one of the things that OpenShift provides is OpenShift Serverless, which is Knative with a bunch of other stuff. So this just works out of the box. And that's one of the reasons I chose this cluster as well, right? I wanted to show you how it besides being it's so easy to deploy onto OpenShift with our Quarkus extension, the Knative stuff also shows up in the regular environment, and it's super easy to use. Okay, so we have some issue here. Oh, right. I don't have because now I'm using a regular I'm not using the OpenShift's build capabilities. I want to actually build the native image, the container image on my own. I need to use Jib again. So that immediately tells you that, like with OpenShift, if you leverage it to its full capabilities, then you also need less configuration on the client side. With the client side in this case is Quarkus, right? Because with OpenShift, you allow the platform to build the container image by itself, where in this case, vanilla Kubernetes doesn't do that, or at least it will in the future with Tecton, which we're also going to add at some point for Quarkus. But at this point, I need to build the native image and build the container image with Jib before I push it to the registry. This will take a couple minutes because it has to build the native image and then push it, and then Kubernetes has to start the Knative and stuff like that. So this is a great time for probably the last questions.
One thing that might be useful is just sort of quickly explaining what Knative is for those that haven't heard of it, don't understand what it means.
Right. Good idea. So I'll try to do my best. Basically, the way I see Knative is it's for me it's like an implementation, let's say, of serverless that uses Kubernetes primitives under the hood, right? So it allows you to scale up and scale down your Kubernetes pods based on inputs like traffic or the number of messages that exist or something like that. So what that means, basically, if I were to show you that in YAML, because YAML is the language of Kubernetes, you'll see that the Knative service is something it's a lot simpler than what we had with the vanilla Kubernetes primitives. Maybe Max, you want to add something here too, or Jason, because I know my explanation is pretty terrible. I don't know if you guys want to add something.
So the first thing I always say about Knative is it has nothing to do with native, even though it's
but you can use native with it.
Yes,
Exactly.
that's good. But no, you got it. I would say serverless is one application of Knative. Knative provides we call them additional set of services you put on a Kubernetes cluster, and one of the things you can build with it is a serverless platform.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah.
I was talking about Knative serving, right? So there's also more stuff. That's what Max refers to. Right?
Yeah, like eventing and so on. So you just basically can have quick spin up of pods that are elastic to some sort of event or to some sort of request and respond to it. So it's a fundamental building block for building a serverless system.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I'll say what that you showed here is one of the things we are actually working on making a bit smoother. And for example, you showed S2I for the OpenShift one. You might try and move to the Docker one for native, not Knative, well Knative, but also native image, because we don't get much benefit of S2I in that case. But what I want to kind of end on is by the way, thanks for the demo. You did this excellent. I'd say that the one key message I have around this whole all these combinations that are MiniCube, Kubernetes, OpenShift serverless, Knative, the whole is that we are trying to make sure that in Quarkus the experience stays the same. Well, as same as it can be, with the same you showed it as command options here to Maven, -d, deploy and push and etc. Once we have so that in itself makes it simpler. Like I said, you don't need much to do this. If you use Jib, for example, and you don't have to even install Docker and that stuff on your machine. But the other goal is also just that even though we have different extensions for it, don't see those extensions as they are doing completely different things. They are literally just taking probably 99% of what the Kubernetes extension does, but then just tweak it for that specific platform's best developer experience. So for MiniCube, we expose to Node port, not something you do in production, but it's annoying to do manually. For OpenShift, utilize the fact that it has a better routing mechanism than basic Kubernetes. And I'm sure once we get to the Knative stuff, we will find a bit more where the pure Kubernetes versus the OpenShift will have some differences. But those differences should be that we do the best thing we can do by default on the platform. So you don't have to tweak it. So yeah, that was just the one thing I I wanted to highlight. That's the whole idea and the power of the extension mechanism we have in Quarkus. That we can adjust to the situation, and
Yeah, so with a few flag changes, Georgios, just I don't know if you saw it in the background while Max was giving that great overview, but by just a few configuration flags, suddenly now you're deploying a native image, and you're also deploying it to Knative versus Kubernetes, and then in deploying to Knative versus Kubernetes, you now have this, as he was just showing in the log file, you may not have caught it, but you've got this millisecond service startup time. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that was the idea. Like while Max was talking, I was just wanting to show like what actually happened in the background.
Yeah, and the same thing is going. We haven't done this yet, but at least I have it on my internal roadmap. The things I want to see happen is the same experience. Apply that for Google Cloud, for Function, for Amazon, so that the kind of Quarkus dev experience goes all around. But still, but not like choose the lowest common denominator, but make each platform shine in what they can do. Right? For example, the OpenShift one is the most obvious one that you don't. Once you deploy there, there's like literally no setup on the client side, which is really nice. So.
Yeah, and so we welcome new extensions. So if there is somebody who is interested in another cloud platform, we mentioned we're already kind of interested in doing some of the others like Google Cloud and so on. But if there's a platform that you're interested in, or perhaps you are actually a cloud provider, we welcome your extension because we want to have first-class experience for everywhere. We're not trying to necessarily pick favorites. Obviously, we care about OpenShift because we think it's awesome, but we want to enable everybody to be able to work well. So I do have a question that just came in. I know we're kind of running out of time, but since we just had so much information to pack in, I hope you guys mind if we go like a minute or two later. And the question is what if you want to add a config map object to your Kubernetes deployment?
Max got me with this one. Max, before we started this, he's like, are you going to show config map? And I'm like, I'll try, but I don't know if I'm going to have enough time. So obviously we ran out of time, sorry, but it's super easy to do that with our Quarkus Kubernetes config extension. Basically, you could use a config map as a property source. So instead of like using a system property Java system property environment variable, you could use config map as a source, and then the Quarkus Kubernetes config extension allows you to read straight from that. And then the Quarkus extension itself also allows you to change the deployment or deployment config, if you're in OpenShift, to read from, to actually, let's say, inject that config map into the pod, if you need to. If you don't use the API, then that's fine. So all config map and secret are supported. I think secrets will only be supported like 1.8. I don't think we have 1.7. But all those combinations do work. It's just that I didn't have time to show it now. I'm sorry.
So we'll have to bring you back on the show, and we will do some more overview. And what's really great, too, is just, as you mentioned, there's like a bunch of features in the pipeline. So that was going to be my question I was going to ask about, which is, kind of what's next. I don't know if you want to do something really brief on that about some of the things that's coming, but I think we're going to need to do a follow-up show to kind of go into more detail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd love that. That'd be great for me. Max, you want to take the pipeline?
Well, if I remember, some of them has happened, but one is like the one we're actually working on is the S2I and Docker support, so we can do native builds a bit simpler. We've done the secrets as you talked about. There's the Quarkus CLIs. I'm not sure it's coming 1.8 or 1.9, but once we have that, all that, let's call it gibberish maven stuff you showed, becomes like a very simple stuff, even though that simplify it even further. There is we haven't mentioned it, but it's already there, the Vault support, which just for people aware of if pumping magazines is not enough, you can use the Vault integration. And the one I'm thinking about is also you talked about a little bit that the monitoring, not the health endpoint, and the metrics. Did we add the stuff? Because we talked about so that we will enable logging automatically, not logging, monitoring automatically.
Metrics, yeah. So what we have now for metrics is that it enables if you add the small ride metrics extension, it adds an annotation to your deployment, which allows, if you have deployed Prometheus with the, like I think the Prometheus operator or something like that, it will automatically pick up your deployment and add that to metrics. But I think there's like another way to do this. We haven't had time to look into it, but I think there's another standard way to do this. So we probably have to generate some CRD, some Prometheus CRD, and to make that even more a even better experience. So yeah, that's another thing that we should do. Yeah.
But that's the whole power of the startup we have. The setup we have here is that based on what extension you've chosen, what target you have of your Docker images, and which version of Java and which version of which extension you have, like small y, one or the other. We generate something that actually is useful. Well, so not useful, that's the wrong word, but something that actually it has the features enabled that you want it to have. Like if you order added metrics, you most likely also want it to be hooked up to your Prometheus Grafana setup out of box. And So if you guys, there's something we haven't thought about, or there's some stuff we do in our company every time, and it's horrible to do. If we could add it in, let us know, and
yeah, and we're very interested in like workflow patterns, because there's so many different tools and technologies. I mean, we're looking at, I mentioned Tecton, build packs. We're kind of looking at images. We're looking at. So basically, we're trying. There's just so much out there. I think just because everything's new and groundbreaking, and there's different approaches to do things. So ideally, we have a system that can kind of cover them all. So Max has mentioned in that whole common pattern. We also have some common APIs that's really interesting. Like we didn't go to it at all in this show, but we have this notion of an API called Funky, which can be used in serverless platforms. So you could use Funky on top of Knative. You could possibly use AWS with it. So it's we're kind of building this up in layers. But what's really helpful is if we know exactly what you're doing, and then we can kind of figure out, okay, well, most people are interested in this, so we're going to kind of focus our energy on that piece. And then we also welcome contributions. So if you want to come in to the Quarkus community, there's a great way to just go to the Quarkus website. There's a get involved link. You can go in there and you can join chat. You can talk to people. You can brainstorm ideas, share this data with us. We'd love to hear how you're using it and how you would like to make a difference. And we'd appreciate that very much.
Absolutely, yeah.
And just on last minute, I saw last time I asked for people to subscribe, which I say thank you, because we just passed 2,000 subscribers. So keep doing that.
That is awesome. Yes. So please subscribe. Tell all your friends and colleagues about this channel. And then also we're open to feedback on the Insights itself. So if you if there's any information you would like us to cover, like, hey, I really wish you guys would do a show on X, or hey, can you guys go back to that topic and do a deeper overview? We'd love to get that feedback from you so that we can ensure that that the content that we have is something that's of value to you, and that makes use and helps you with your job better and helps you understand Quarkus better. So with that, I'll do I know we're kind of out of time, so I'm just gonna real quick say, is there any last call for Max or Georgios? Do you want anything else you want to say? I'm about to just pull Manuel into the show.
Me too. Bring him on.
Okay.
I'm good.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, but we'll probably figure out something. We need to, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.